Thank you everyone for joining us today for our creativity workshop. We are hosting this workshop today, June 2nd, 2021, and we are thrilled to welcome our guest presenter, Joseph Lebrec. Joseph will be sharing interactivity with Adobe Animate for beginners, and so we'll explore easy ways of creating interactive content. Our guest presenter, Joseph Lebrec, is an instructor of technology at the University of Colorado Boulder. He's also a partner by design, an Adobe education leader, a creative educator, and he will be able to share more about his work and himself and further introduce himself as I stop sharing and allow Joseph to go ahead and take over. So Joseph, feel free to begin.
All right, thanks, Leona. I'm going to share my screen. Wait. I'm still not used to blue jeans, though. All right, let's share the screen over here. So you should see my screen.
Yep.
Wow, this is weird. So blue jeans is like over here. And
do you need to share desktop, or do you need to toggle back and forth? Because there's a share feature that allows your whole desktop if you wanted that.
I'm just wondering, I've got the whole desktop. I'm just wondering if I can put blue jeans back to where it was. It's like this floating thing right now. It's fine.
You can drag it.
All right,
Is that good?
A drag. Yeah, that'll work. That'll work.
Okay.
All right, cool.
Okay. All right, awesome.
And oh, look at that. I can open up the chat here too, which is nice. So, hey everyone. I see that Emily just came in, and Kevin and Robert and Claudia are here. So hey, how's everyone doing? So yeah, we're gonna talk about interactivity with Adobe Animate for beginners. And the reason that I picked this topic, and I picked it quite a while ago, right? Because you have to get in the queue for these things. I picked this because it seems like a lot of people, especially some people in education, seem to think that Adobe Animate is a very difficult application to use, and that it's more for people who are doing stuff for web or developers even, which used to be the case, right? When it was in its former existence as Flash Professional, a lot of developers were using it, a lot of interactives are created. These days it's a lot more agnostic than that, of course. It's a platform agnostic tool. And even though a lot of people, and even a lot of people at Adobe, tend to, lump Animate into web, you'll see by the icon that was changed back when they switched all the icons around, right? It now has the same coloring as the video and audio and motion applications. So, things like Premiere Pro, After Effects, Character Animator, Audition, Media Encoder, all of those guys, right? So it's actually in the group of video and motion around this time. It isn't targeting, it can target web, but that's not its primary focus. And when it comes to interactivity, we're going to explore some real basics today around how to create some interactive stuff and some of the basic interactive things you might want to try out inside of Animate to build some little, cool little fun play things or something like that, right? So that's the idea for today. And I've got a couple slides. I don't have a ton of slides. And then we're going to get into Animate itself. And we'll look at a couple of different ways that you can go about this. And again, a very basic way. Should be pretty simple to digest. I'm not going to do anything crazy, right? So, yeah. Happy June, everyone. So a little bit about myself. As Leona mentioned, I'm instructor of technology for the Department of Advertising, PR, and Media Design at the College of Media Communication and Information at the University of Colorado Boulder. And here's a nice image provided by the university of the university. So we're located in Boulder, Colorado, of course, and We're right next to the Flatirons, so, just right before, the whole mountain thing comes up. You can see some of them in that image right there. It's a really nice place to work. Previous to this, I was with the University of Denver for 17 years, and they have a nice campus too. Yes, so I'm also AEL Partner by Design, Creative Educator, and Adobe Community Professional. Before we get into it, I've got a couple of things to mention, other resources around Animate. I have a new book, Mastering Adobe Animate 2021. It's been out for a few months now. I kind of wrote it over Christmas break. It's about 404 pages long. That is kind of a web joke, but it's true. 404 pages of content. And Ajay Shukla, who is the PM for Animate, was nice enough to write a foreword for this. So thank you, Ajay, if you ever see this. Also, LinkedIn Learning. I had a new LinkedIn Learning course with Animate drop last week. So I've got about 18 courses on LinkedIn Learning right now, and most of them do revolve around Adobe Animate. So if you're interested in learning what's new, getting essential training on Animate, or doing stuff with going way beyond what we're doing today when it comes to beginning interactivity and actually, doing like data ingest and like parsing and all sorts of like weird stuff like that, I've got courses on all levels of using Adobe Animate. Also, I should mention Behance live streams. So I normally live stream on Behance on Wednesdays in the morning. You can see here 8 a.m. Pacific time. And I actually do keep a schedule, which is at my Behance, which is be.net/Joseph Lebrecq. And if you want to go to my live stream ever, you just add live streams after that, and you'll come to a page where I am live streaming. Also, there is this little URL right here, which is everybody else who streams as well. So let me see if I can pull that up and pop it in the chat, because I'm not the only streamer for education, right? There's about 6 of us or so, and you can always get access to the schedule, which is right here. That's a little Spark page. We keep it updated as well as we can. And yeah, check out everyone else who is also streaming. It's fun to stream on Behance, and it's also, fun to join in and listen, especially now that, we're going on over a year where, AELs and other educators really can't get together to chat about stuff. It's a great way to do that because it is a mechanism for a social interaction as well as, presentation and work and so forth. So, Animate 2021. This is just a little bit something about Animate. It should give you a good idea, if you're not familiar, the kinds of things you can do with the software. So design interactive animations for games, TV shows, and the web, bring cartoons and banner ads to life, create animated doodles and avatars, add interaction to e-learning content and infographics. With Animate, you can quickly publish to multiple platforms. So again, it's not just a single platform you publish to. You can publish to all sorts of different stuff, both interactive and non. Just about any format, reach viewers on any screen. So this is how Adobe positions Animate. This is how the Animate team positions it, and it's a good reflection of the amount of things you can do with the software. It mentions in the middle here about adding action to e-learning content and infographics. So, some of those things are very common, like click here and something happens, right? So that's the sort of stuff we're going to look at today. Before we get into Animate, we have to talk a little bit about the different platforms, right? So being that Animate supports multiple platforms, depending upon the platform that you choose, the document type you choose at the beginning when you create a new document, that's going to depend what language you'd be writing any sort of interactivity in. Also, the different things that you can target. So, as you can see here with something like HTML5 Canvas, you'd be able to target the native web, right? And you'd be using JavaScript. WebGL, same deal, except that's 3D accelerated. So GPU accelerated WebGL stuff instead of just a plain old HTML5 canvas. Virtual reality, that also targets the web. So ActionScript 3.0, you don't actually have to do any code when you create a document using ActionScript 3.0. This is the old Flash player format. But what people use it for now is to basically just create video and animated content. So if you're doing any sort of character animation, scenic animation, basically any kind of motion or animation, ActionScript 3.0 is a really good choice because you can take that and you can bring that directly into something like After Effects to further composite it. And you can generate HD video with it. You can generate animated GIF files. You can generate packages of multiple kinds. You also have the ability to use Air. So Air is the Adobe integrated runtime. You can target Mac OS and Windows on desktop, iOS and Android in its various forms, either tablet-wise, phone-wise, TV-wise. And Air is mostly straight up for interactivity. So if you want to do application development, game development, and target different platforms, that's a good choice. You can also do that sort of stuff with the WebGL and HTML5 canvas stuff, but then you're dealing with just like native web technologies, so it's, you might not want to deal with that. And custom platforms, so things like Lottie Files. Lottie Files has an extension for Adobe Animate out right now, and that really isn't very interactive, right? It's basically animation. So let's have a look at what sort of activity we can deal with there. So we have kind of two types in my mind anyway. This isn't what they're actually called. These are sort of like my labels to these different types of interactivity. When I was thinking about like the basics of interactivity inside of Animate, I kind of broke it down into two different types of interactivity. We have implicit interactivity, and then we have explicit interactivity. Implicit interactivity would be more like, something that's really inherent to the platform that you're targeting. So I give some examples here. So like virtual reality, perspective control is implicit interactivity. So what you'd be able to do is, just without doing anything, basically, if you create something for VR, you're able to click and drag to look around the screen, right? You don't have to code that at all. You don't have to write that interactivity. It's implicit. With WebGL, you've got perspective control via some sort of a player. So when you produce something in WebGL standard, it is a standard-based WebGL GLTF target. So you'd be able to pull that content into something like Babylon.js or any other player that plays standard WebGL GLTF content, and whatever sort of controls that player presents to you, you'd of course be able to use. So that's also implicit. You don't have to do anything. 106 degrees Fahrenheit? Remind me where you live, Shannon. That's crazy. Yikes. So explicit interactivity would be any sort of custom code that you write, right? So if you just like pull something up and you start, creating interactivity, writing code, targeting these elements, that would be explicit. It's something you're like directing, right? And Animate's interesting because it has like this sort of middle ground as well, where you can actually build the code out without writing it. So step by step through something called the Actions Wizard, and we'll have a look at that today. That doesn't necessarily mean that you know what the code is that you're writing. It's more that you're piecing it together through different sort of descriptive commands, if that makes sense. It'll make sense later if it doesn't yet. So let's open up Adobe Animate and have a look and see what's what. So let's see. I have Animate open here someplace. Boom. There we go. So here's Adobe Animate. And this is probably going to look, if you've never used Animate before, it should look very, very similar to what you'd see when you open up something like Photoshop or Illustrator. You've got the basic sort of home screen where you have different presets. You can access more presets here. You've got your recent files. You can create new and open. And you also have a little Learn tab. So some of these are video-based. Oh, there's one of mine. So there's content from a couple of people in here. Myself, I know Matthias, who is also an AEL, has some content in here. Also, Chris Georginas has some stuff in here, and yeah, there's lots of fun little tutorials and things like that to get started with Adobe Animate. So let's actually do that. Let's get started with Animate. Let's figure something out here. So whether you press on Create New or you choose New Presets, either one of these is going to bring up the New Document dialog in Animate. And there's a couple of choices you can make when this comes up, right? So if you've never opened it up before, it'll probably default to character animation. And you've got a number of presets here. Again, very, very similar to something you'd see when you're creating a new document in other Adobe applications like Photoshop, Illustrator, and so forth. So you got some additional things in here, like one that since I teach a lot of advertising students, right? They have an ads preset. So Animate is heavily used to create both motion ads and interactive ads that can be distributed across Google Ad Network, DoubleClick, and all the rest, right? And you've got here a bunch of presets for specific ad standards for both web and mobile. So you can easily start something out with that. It's a good example of how you might start with a preset. However, you can always go to this advanced category right here, and what you're going to find is that you're able to now, instead of choosing from sort of like, a preset or a category, you can actually start something based on the platform. So this is why we were talking about platforms earlier. And you can see here you've got ActionScript 3.0, which if you look over here, it tells you it creates Flash assets. So, Kevin mentioned earlier that we're going to play with Flash today. We're not going to use ActionScript 3.0 because we're dealing with interactivity. ActionScript 3.0, like I said, it's mostly used these days for creating either animated GIFs or raw video content or things that are going to end up in another application like After Effects or something like that. Usually, animators are using ActionScript 3.0. If you're looking at interactive content, you're going to want to choose something else. And yeah, so Kevin asked ActionScript 3.0 for interactive touchscreens. You could, but you might want to look more towards Air for that, just because things are a little weird around, support for different versions of Flash Player. Most versions of Flash Player are just, completely useless at this point. So I would always suggest in 2021, if you're doing something with ActionScript 3.0, you're probably going to want to have non-interactive content. So what we're going to choose today is HTML5 Canvas. HTML5 Canvas is the most accessible way of, starting off with interactive content inside of Animate. Why is that? Pretty much two reasons. One reason is because HTML5 Canvas is targeting the native web. So it's really easy to create something inside of HTML5 Canvas, and it'll play back just about anywhere that you can run, modern browser technologies, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, right? Primarily JavaScript. The second reason is because there's a lot of little kind of helpful things inside of HTML5 Canvas, such as the Actions wizard. So being able to piece together, functions and commands and things like that, and listeners, without knowing JavaScript necessarily, right? So let's have a look here. Down below, this is where you'll find some of those other platforms. So if you're looking for WebGL, GLTF standard, you've got it right there. Here's Extended. Extended can also be interactive, whereas Standard really can't, except for that implicit interactivity. And then you've got two different VR type platforms, which last year I did a bunch of Animate stuff on VR. So if you're interested in that, I'm sure you can find it in the recordings, Or I do have the LinkedIn Learning course. There's one on VR. And I've also got a chapter in my book around working with VR and Animate. So lots of resources out there around VR. So we're going to start with HTML5 Canvas. So immediately when we go in here, we can choose a width and a height. It's fine. We can leave it at default. Let's keep it as easy as possible. Frame rate has more to do with animation than it does with interactivity, but it basically tells you how many individual frames are going to account for 1 second of time. You'll see this represented inside of Animate as FPS, which means frames per second. Ooh, little glitch there. Yeah, so we got 24 frames per second as our frame rate. That's going to mean that every second of content in the timeline consists of 24 individual frames. So let's go ahead and hit create here. It's going to create a new document for us. There we go. There's our new document. Let's actually, there we go, make that bigger. So this is Animate. So Animate had a kind of big refresh in the 2020 version, which was at the end of 2019, because that's how Adobe does things. Sort of like car manufacturers, you know. You always get the new model before the old year has expired. So this is Animate 2021. This is the latest version. And they haven't changed a ton of stuff in the UI between 2020 and 2021 because it's so new, of course. There are new tools and things like that, but basically you got your timeline down here, you got your tools along the side, you've got your properties panel and some other things over on the other side, and right in the middle you've got your stage, which is basically a big artboard, and then you have what's known as the pasteboard around that, which is just space that's not really visible once you publish. So you can use the pasteboard to, keep things off screen until they're needed. You can animate things from the pasteboard onto the stage and lots of things like that. Yeah, it's very similar to how like Illustrator is set up with its artboard. Or, if you're coming from After Effects, this would be like a comp, right? Animate does not have the concept of nesting stages. Back in Flash days, there actually used to be that sort of concept. But yeah, in terms of how things are now, you've got your document, you've got your stage. If you want to do anything nested, you're going to be using basically symbols to do that. So symbols are like specially packaged little bits and pieces. And actually, the stage itself is actually one giant movie clip symbol, if you're interested in knowing things like that. So when it comes to interactivity, what are the most basic things we can do? We're gonna start off so basic here, right? So I'm gonna go in and you can see these tools here. Of course, we have different shape tools. We've got rectangle tools, oval tools, polystar tools, and so forth. I'm just gonna choose rectangle tool. And then over in my properties panel, you'll notice the properties panel in Animate is divided into 4 different categories. You have your tool properties for any currently selected tool. You have your object properties, which is disabled right now. If I had selected anything on the stage, I would have properties revealed for that particular object. Frame properties, so these are properties. If I click this frame down here, we can see there are our frame properties for that frame. And then I have the all-important document properties. So here's where we can change things like the width and the height, the FPS setting, and also things like the stage color. So if I change the background color to be something a little nicer, maybe this kind of nice springtime violet, that's going to be a lot nicer to see than just that glaring white. And really most of the time when I start a new Animate project, I just make it black, right? It's what I'm used to doing in something. I mean, you create a new sequence in Premiere, black. You generally create a comp in After Effects, it's probably going to be black, right? Yeah, if you look behind me here, obviously black. So, let's go ahead and have a look at our timeline. So right now in our timeline, we've got something called layer_1. Animate is automatically going to create layers and number them for you as layer_1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So if I add a new layer, then I have layer underscore 2. We can rename these layers, and you'll notice here, unlike After Effects, when you're dealing with stuff in Animate, layers aren't created by the content, right? Like in After Effects, you drag something into your timeline, into your layers area, and that becomes the layer, right? It's represented as a layer. Inside of Animate, you can actually have many, many different objects on each layer. So that's why it's a little bit different, right? And when it comes to interactive content, this is a big change because we're not dealing with animation here, right? Although you could be. You can mix the two, right? It doesn't have to be interactive or animated. You can always have animated interaction, which is, of course, kind of like the sweet spot, right? So here we are inside of layers. So generally, when you're writing anything interactive inside of Animate, no matter what type of platform you're dealing with, you're going to want to reserve a particular layer to hold any of your code. So if I double click on layer 2, I can rename this. And simply because this is sort of what people have been using as a convention for the past like 20, 25 years when dealing with stuff like this. Oh gosh, am I still here?
Yes.
Yes.
You're still here.
That's weird. I just looked over there and my little blue jeans thing is like frozen.
Well, your video, you might want to mute your video and then unmute it again because it got stuck. But
Yeah, it looks like something's trying to.
but we can hear you fine and we
Let's
can
go
see
ahead and
your
do
game.
that.
Yeah, there we are.
There we go. Now I don't look like I'm about to die anymore. That's perfect.
Yeah, it just said poor network is all. We couldn't see you.
As an aside, can't stand blue jeans.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
It's a Monday.
it's cool.
Go ahead.
Very, very disconcerting though, looking over there.
Yeah.
Seeing that. All right. So we've got our actions layer, right? We also have a layer I'm going to just name content. This is going to contain my assets. So and you can always lock down your actions layer. Locking something down inside of Animate is just like how you would lock something down in just about any other Adobe app, right? It makes it so you can't like do anything weird in there. However, you are able to still add code to a layer once it's been locked down. So super useful to be able to do that, just so you don't, by mistake, include any visual assets inside of the layer that's reserved for your code. So what we want to do is select our content layer, and then with our rectangle tool selected, let's go to our tool properties again. We'll pick out a color for a button. So maybe a darker purple. Bring that alpha transparency up, and let's give it a stroke. Something like 6 for the value. And rectangle option. So you can change the corner radius, right? Let's go ahead and change that to something like 8. It's pretty safe. And then all we need to do is click and drag. Yeah, we got a little rectangle that, kind of looks like a button, right? So now that we've got this guy, we can always go through and go to our text tool. So the text tool is going to allow us to generate text, right? So if I choose the text tool here, we can change like the size of the text, the fill color. Maybe I'll actually sample from my background fill color from the stage. Something I love about Animate and the way that you're able to like easily manipulate things, like you'll notice I didn't have to press any like shortcut keys or like, explicitly choose my eyedropper tool. Just as soon as I go in to change the color, Animate automatically is like, oh, you want to sample that from somewhere? And it's like, oh my gosh, Animate, thank you. Like, you know me so well. That's awesome. So let's see here. We're looking at ITC Avant-Garde Gothic Pro. I'm not sure what that looks like, but let's go ahead and have a look. I'm just gonna, it's pretty standard looking item there, right? Increase that size a little bit, and we can kind of eyeball that. There we go. All right. So I've got a button. Papyrus, I'm not sure I have. I think I do have like Herculaneum on here though. We could always choose that. That's pretty similar, right? And equally overused. Maybe some copperplate, Gothic. Maybe just Arial, Helvetica. How about Times New Roman? That always looks great. All right. So let's go ahead, and what we're going to do is these are two separate objects now. So if we look up here in our object properties, we can see if I click the text, this is a static text object. If I click the rectangle, we have a drawing object or a shape, right? So let's go ahead and just draw a selection rectangle around both of these. What that's going to do is it's going to select them both. So what we can do here is we can see through this an example of both that explicit alongside of the implicit interaction that we were talking about before. So now that I have both of these selected, you'll notice that our object properties show mixed as the object type. That's because the selection of objects I have are of different types, right? I've got text and I have shapes. But right below here, you have your quick actions. So similar to, again, going back to like Photoshop and Illustrator, you know, when you select something in those programs and you look in the properties panel, you get a number of quick actions. Like in Photoshop, if you select an object, an image, you'll get a quick action to remove background. Or if you don't have anything selected, you'll have the option to trim your document. Similar here, it presents things that are intelligent. So it's like, oh, what would you want to do with mixed content? It's like, do you want to convert this to a symbol? It's like, yeah, I do. So this is what this is right here, convert it to a symbol. You could also go to modify, convert to symbol. That's going to do the same sort of thing. So let's go ahead and click that, and we get the convert to symbol dialog here. So we can change this symbol type. The default is a movie clip symbol. Movie clip symbols can be interactive, so we could choose movie clip symbol. And then we have button symbols. Button symbols can also be interactive, but button symbols are a little special because their internal timeline has 4 specific states that align to the expectations of interactive buttons, right? So that's what we're going to actually use here. Graphic symbols, the last one on the list, that's strictly for animation, and they work great for that. However, since we're dealing with interactivity, we're going to want to choose movie clip or button. So I'm going to choose button right here, and I got to give it a name instead of symbol 1. That's a stupid name. So let's go ahead and call this Flicky. That's a much better name, and I'll hit OK. So now with this object selected, I can see that it's an object, and it's an instance of Clicky with a button behavior. So to actually access the sort of implicit interactivity inside of a button, what we would do is actually double click on that button. And now we're taken inside of our symbol. So again, this is how nesting works inside of Animate. You've got sort of like your main timeline, and then the different objects you have on that main timeline can be symbols. And if they are symbols, then you can go into their timelines. And of course, if there's symbols in there, then you can go into their timelines as well. So it's nesting, 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 nesting. And you can do some really cool stuff with that. However, if we look down the timeline here for my clicky button symbol instance timeline, what we can see is that we have another layer, layer 1. And we can see that the frames are called something completely different. They're not called like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're just called up, over, down, and hit. So this is sort of like, if you've ever used Adobe XD to kind of like create hover states for your different components. Components work very similar to symbols in a way. And hover states inside of XD, they get auto-wired, right? You get that little lightning bolt near it where it's automatically sort of interactive. This is sort of the same idea here, right? So if I go through, you can see I have only content on my up layer. if I click this button right above the timeline here, this will insert keyframes. And what it will effectively do is duplicate any keyframes that I already have. So if I click this a couple times, I now have content for my overstate and content for my downstate. So for my overstate, maybe I want to change this text color. So let's go ahead and make sure the playhead is at my overstate. And I'm going to select only the text. And here I can change its fill color to just pure white, right? Going over to my downstate, you can see that these states are now different. There's different content on each of these frames. So what I'm going to do is click on my rectangle here, and maybe I just want to darken my violet color here. You get a little preview right there in the color picker. You hit OK. There we go, right? So now I have an upstate, an overstate, and a downstate, and they all look different, right? Let's go back out to scene 1. So that's the root timeline, the one we were at before. And you can see everything's the same here, right? Exactly the same. Clicking on this on the stage doesn't do anything. What you have to do if you want to see this work is actually hit this little test movie button up here in the upper right. Looks like a play button. And when you do that, what it's going to do is... What? Oh, there we go. Open up in Safari over here. So again, this is my web browser, right? And if I hover over it, you can see that not only does the text change to white from that light violet, but I also get the little pointer cursor, right? So I didn't have to write any code whatsoever to make this interactive. It's already done it. Of course, if I click on it, then there we go. We get that sort of change as well. So that's probably the easiest way to create interactivity inside of Animate. But that's not all that interesting, right? So when we click this, let's actually have something happen. So we can see sort of that hybrid approach toward explicit interactivity. So notice that because I did that test movie up here, I see these warnings right here. I wish the Animate team would get rid of this feature because it freaks people out who have never done this before. I mean, you see warnings and you automatically like, oh, what did I do wrong, right? So this isn't a warning. It's information. It's just telling you, hey, we packed up 5 bitmaps into a sprite sheet. And then it tells you, hey, if you're doing any sort of interactivity inside of easel.js, which is the library that's used inside of HTML5 Canvas to create interactivity, or motion rather, the frame numbers start at 0 instead of 1. And it tells you like more stuff, may generate local security error. Yeah, it might, because browsers are very restrictive around exactly how image content and interactivity work together, right? So if we look back here, Animate gets around this. You can see when I did a test movie, it actually creates a little internal server that it serves it at to get around any sort of browser security errors. So this is a local server IP of 127.0.0.1. If you ran this by itself without running it through a little internal server like that, it'll probably give you security errors in the browser. Unless you're using an old browser, which you shouldn't be. So let's go ahead and get rid of these output errors. All you have to do is click on timeline, and you're back to your timeline. So pretty simple. So what do we want to do when we click something? Let's make it so when we click the button, something appears, right? So what should that thing be that appears? Actually, let's look at our assets panel over here. So we got properties, library, assets, and you can always get to these different panels through the window menu, just like anything else. So if you go into your assets and we look here, we can see there's some animated assets. These are like pre-packaged movie clip symbols and graphic symbols and things like that. So we can let's look at all, or we can look at static. Maybe I want static stuff. We've got backgrounds, characters, props. Let's see if we can find anything interesting. That's not very interesting. Let's go back to animated. It's a little fire. That's kind of cool. Maybe we should do that. Let's do that. So this little flame, I'm going to just pull this directly onto my stage. Was there a dragon? I didn't see the dragon. There's a bear. There's a crab. Yeah, they change how these... Oh, there's the dragon right there. So I think this is going to be the simplest thing to do, though, is to have this little guy right there. So I'm going to go back to my properties panel. And if we look with that object selected, you'll notice a couple things have happened here. It's inserted it on its own layer. But also, if we look here, we can see this is an instance of a movie clip symbol called flame. So approaching the home stretch here for the demo, we now have two objects on our stage that can be interactive. We have our button symbol right here, click, and you can see it right there. And then we have this flame symbol, which is a movie clip symbol right here. You'll notice that both of these symbol types, right underneath the behavior right here, you have the prompt to add an instance name. So just like how you name your cat or you name your dog in hopes that when you call the animal, it will respond to you. With code, it's the same kind of thing, right? With any interactivity, you have to be able to target certain objects. And in order to do that, you have to name them. So, just like, or to heck with pets, like if you name, like if you make a baby and you name the baby, right? Then the baby gets older and you're like, hey, baby. You don't want to call it baby all the time because it's not going to know what's going on. That baby goes to like nursery school and, the teachers are going to be like, just calling them all baby. It's not going to know what baby you're talking about. So this is the way of making sure that you're talking to the right baby, right? So if I go into my movie clip instance name here, I'm going to just call this, let's call it fire, just so it's a little different from flame. And now this has a name. I can name it. I can give it instructions, right? Similar thing to this button here, Flicky. Let's just call this this is so boring. Click. Flicky. Yeah, let's use Flicky. Yeah. Flicky. Nice. Okay. So we got this button, Clicky, and his name's Flicky. So at this point, we can actually start naming these things. And before, just to make sure Animate doesn't crash, I'm just going to save this. There we go. Demo.fla. So an FLA file is an Animate document file. No matter what kind of platform you choose at the beginning, it's always going to be an FLA. All right, so last step of this is to actually get these things talking to one another and listening for user input. So to do this, all you got to do is go way back to that actions layer we created to hold our code. And if we select on that particular frame, we can see up here our frame properties are selected. And this little button right here, it looks like a circle with an arrow. This will bring up our actions panel. And this is how we bind code to our specific frame right here in our actions layer. Now, when it first opens up, right, what we see is a big script editor. So if you knew what to write here, you could absolutely write all the instruction in order to get this working, right? However, there's this other option up top, add using wizard. So if I click that, it turns into this step-by-step intelligent way of presenting me with choices and based on the current document, the platform type, and all the rest. So if I look down here, step one is to select an action. So what do I want to have happen when I click that button, right? So you could have something play. You could move the playhead to a certain frame on the main timeline or through like the timeline of another object. You can start or stop an animation. You can rotate and position objects. But check that out right here, show and hide. So let's go ahead and make the flame disappear. So as soon as I click that, it's like, well, which object do you want to apply this action to? So what do we want to show or hide? We want to show or hide fire. So you can see up here, it's building out the code. So this dot fire equals visible, or this dot fire dot visible equals true. That's saying there's a visible property on our fire object that can be set to true or false to make it visible or not. So let's hit next. And from here, we can say, what's the triggering event? And sure enough, one of those triggering events is a mouse click. So that's what I want to have happen. I want somebody to click on that button and then have the fire respond. So on mouse click. And then what do I want the user to click? I don't want the user to click fire. I want the user to click my button, which is named Flicky. And you can see anything that you give an instance name to, when you go through the wizard here, you don't even have to remember how to spell it because Animate is going to, show you your options. So I choose Flicky, and let's hit finish and add. All right. What we have here is we have a bunch of comments. So these comments, they're gray, and they show you, they kind of explain what's going on, right? So I'm going to remove the comments just because they look a little messy. And let's see what we have, right? So we're saying when we click on the button named Flicky, we're going to set fire's visibility to true. However, fire's visibility right now is actually true already. So if I ran this and clicked on it, it wouldn't do anything. But what we can do now that we have the code, I can actually select it and do a Command C to copy. And then right before that function, I can reset this to false. So what's going to happen is this is going to run. The program will automatically set fire visible to false, so we won't see the fire. And then it's just going to wait until it senses a click on our button, in which case it will set fire's visible property to true. So basically, we're turning on that fire, right? Let's go ahead and collapse our actions panel and test movie again. And here it comes up inside Safari. So notice I told the fire to have its visible property set to false. Sure enough, it listened to me. And if I click my button here, there it goes. And because we used a graphic symbol here, or a movie clip symbol, that internal timeline of the fire is just going to keep going, right? So we could do a number of things beyond this too if we had the time or interest to do it, in which case you could actually turn that click button into a toggle. And you could read that visible property of the fire to see whether it was true or false, and then set it to the inverse, right? So that'd be kind of like a nice next step. Or you could always create two buttons, one for like off and on. There's lots of different things you could do. But this is a nice example, I think, of some basic interactivity and just how simple this activity is in Adobe Animate, right? Pretty simple. You could build all sorts of things just based on these little these little triggers that are just inherent to each platform, and then expand on that once you see the code that's been written. So that is the little demo and the info I wanted to share today. Thanks everyone for attending, and I hope you found it interesting. For those watching the recording too, I highly suggest you try Animate out. Even if it's not for interactive stuff, you just want to animate stuff. You can do so many things in the application. I've included my university email and my Twitter handle here, so yeah, get in touch if you have any questions around this, or if you just want to name babies or something. I don't know.
That was so wonderful. Thank you, Joseph. Um, Robert was saying it's a lot easier than he thought it would be based on his earlier experiences. So you were able to really change some perceptions and experiences through this demo. So thank you.
Cool.
If anyone has questions or comments, feel free to unmute your mic or drop them in the chat. And Emily says it looks pretty intuitive. We enjoyed naming pets and babies with you. That was awesome.
Yeah, I should have used the little puppy instead of the fire.
That was great. Yeah. Oh, so Emily's asking, is it's still exported as a .fla?
No, it's so when you save it, it saves it as an FLA file, which is an Animate authoring file. I don't know where that FL comes from. Doesn't make any sense, right? But it's an Animate authoring file type of FLA, and that it doesn't matter what platform you're using. If it's HTML5 Canvas, WebGL, ActionScript 3.0, no matter what, it's always going to be an FLA file. That is your authoring file. That's similar to a PSD file or a .ai file. When you actually publish or test, that will depend upon the platform. So I published as HTML5 Canvas when I did a test movie. So it generated HTML and JavaScript and stuff like that.
I just find that interesting since I used to specialize in Flash a cajillion years ago. It was like 20 years ago, which is weird.
Yeah.
I just find I've worked so little in Animate that I did not realize that was like the native file format. And that's kind of like, calling somebody by the old baby's name. I don't know. I think that's a little weird. I also just find the name Animate weird because I think it doesn't give enough indication of what the program can really do.
Yeah, no, it's definitely weird. I agree on both cases. And I think part of it was when they rebranded Flash Professional to Animate. It was coming right off the heels of Edge Animate going away. So Edge Animate, the extension was .an, and which would make a lot more sense, right? But newer file formats that it can generate, if you package up any assets that you create for distribution, that will create a .ana file, so an animate asset file. And I can see in the future maybe they'll change it. I don't know. But yeah, it was just part of that time, which is really confusing because you just had Edge Animate and then it went away. And then they rebranded Flash Professional to Animate, which of course is super generic and not really telling at all what the program can do. And then shortly after that, you had Adobe create Character Animator, which throws even more confusion into the whole thing. So I kind of wonder if they were just we don't need any more changes right now. let's just keep it FLA.
In the text menu for your fonts, do you have access within Animate the full Adobe Creative Cloud font collection?
Yeah, you do. So anything that you did sync to your computer will show up in there. So if you selected Adobe fonts that you then sync to your computer, just like they show up in other Adobe apps or Microsoft Word or whatever you're using, they'll show up inside of Animate as well. The only thing with Animate is you don't get that nice filter that you get with Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign, where you can say show me only my Creative Cloud fonts. You don't get that, unfortunately. But it's better than what you get with XD, which is basically a unstyled list of font names. So it's a nice in-between.
Mm-hmm. And you can even choose non-active Adobe fonts, Kevin is asking.
Oh well, if you go and if you activate them to your subscription, then you can use them. Or if you have fonts that you installed from Google or DaFont or something like that, you can use those too.
Right, but from within Animate itself, I can't activate non-activated Adobe fonts. It's just whatever is activated on my system.
Oh, I see. You can. It actually does have a process for that, but you have to be using. So I didn't get into this because I wanted to keep it really basic, right? But if we were to go in here, like boop, 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 I select my text, you'll notice my text object is set to static text. But if I chose dynamic text, this is text where its values can change. So for that, I would need to use a web font. And when I choose dynamic text, notice I get this little add web fonts doodad right here. And I can choose from either Google Web Fonts or Adobe Fonts. And then that brings up a little thing inside of here where I can, yeah, I know Adobe. Get started. So it'll bring up Adobe Fonts right here, and I can search. So like, if I wanted to look for like Peachy Keen, and I already have Peachy Keen installed, so I don't know if it's going to show up, but it kind of should.
Can you click on the filter?
Yeah,
There
so you
go.
get
Perfect. Great.
thing.
Yeah, so much better than XD.
Yeah, but you the thing that I wish that this menu, which is what I was talking about, you get like the font type here, like you see true type, open type, and stuff like that, and you do get a nice little rendered sample, right? So if I want to change this to Balboa Plus or something like that, there we go. But you don't get those nice filtering inside of the font selection menu, which would be nice because I do like that in other applications.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will stop the recording, and before doing so, wanted to say thank you again to Joseph for sharing your insight today and breaking it down to a really simplistic interface so that we can all get started. And just want to invite you all to our next creativity workshop, which is in 2 weeks, where we will discuss leadership and education through creativity. So thank you all for joining.